Office, 18 office.
Any specific mention of these up until now?
Okay, that's not right, anything.
No microscopic monsters on your fish. What
You're gonna do, this is diseases, I think we're gonna do. This is four.
It's for a good reason. You learn what makes a fish, follow the guidelines of good water quality, proper handling techniques, and nutrition. You might not see many diseases in your tanks. However, it's not a perfect world. So now we're going to try and tackle some of the major pathogens you might encounter and what to do about them. There are a lot of things that live in the water besides your fish. Your tanks or ponds or ecosystems, and especially at a microscopic level, have a lot going on. The filter and other substrate are home to the bacteria which feed upon the fish waste. And any organic matter will be host to a wide variety of microscopic critters. Most of these are actually beneficial and key to keeping a healthy system, but some are parasites of fish. A parasite is an organism that lives at the expense of another. A good parasite never kills its host, as this often signals its own demise. Unfortunately, many fish parasites haven't learned this, and if you leave the situation unchecked, the end result is often sick or dead fish. Across the board, fish can usually handle a light load of parasites. If you look hard enough at any given population, you're going to find some parasites. The problem comes when we stress the fish, causing a drop in their immune response. Also, if the fish are being challenged by a huge number of parasites in the environment, sooner or later their defenses will be overcome. In fish health, we can divide parasites into two large groups, obligative and facultative. Parasites can also be classified by where they're found on the fish, either external or internal, and by what group of animals they belong to. We're going to go through the major ones and just try to keep them in some kind of order for you. The flagellates are some of the smallest parasites we find on and in fish. They have very fine flagella, or whip-like hairs, which they use for locomotion. On the outside, flagellates such as Costia or Ichthyoboda can infest the gills, skin, and fins of the fish. And on the inside, we find flagellates such as Hexamida and Spironucleus in the intestines. As we look at more and more marine fish, we're finding that they have very similar flagellates as well. These are mostly obligative parasites. Because they're so small, it takes a very good microscope to see them. Heavy infections can develop quickly, and death rates can be pretty high. When infested on the outside, the fish may appear to have a grayish tint, which results from the profusion of slime, the fish's response to these parasites. Be careful though. This isn't necessarily proof that the fish has flagellates on it. A microscopic inspection is necessary. One dosage with a broad-spectrum anti-parasite treatment will control flagellates on the outside of the fish. Flagellates in the gut are difficult to diagnose without sacrificing a fish. Externally, the fish will often just appear listless, and slowly it will start to decline. A fecal sample will often show flagellate infection, but microscopic inspection of a piece of the gut is the best way to find them. If the fish are eating, the best way to treat them is with a medicated feed. The ciliated protozoans are the most common parasites that we find on the outside of the fish. They are extremely small, and almost all of them require a microscope for proper identification. They are characterized by the tiny cilia, or hairs, which surround part or all of their bodies, which they use to move about or to feed with. Most are facultative, living in the organic matter in the bottom of the tank. Some are free swimming, such as Trichodina and Chilodonella. Some feed directly on the fish's tissue or fluids, and some are attached and actually feed from the water column and not the fish. However, if there are a lot of them attached to the gills or skin, these attachment points become a site for infection from other organisms, especially bacteria. Most of the ciliated protozoans reproduce by dividing. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, etc. And therefore, one treatment usually gets rid of all of them. Perhaps the most notorious of all the parasites is ick. This short name comes from the freshwater ciliate, Ichthyopterus multifilus. There is an almost identical marine species called Cryptocarian irritans, or saltwater ick. Both are an obligative parasite, so without a fish, it doesn't last very long. Ick is often present in very small numbers, and as long as the fish are healthy, there may not be a problem. However, stress the fish just a little, like letting the water drop a few degrees overnight, or moving the fish to a new tank, and you can get an explosion of ick.
Part of the problem with ick is simply in the way that it reproduces. The adults embed themselves into the skin of the fish, where they form the classic white spots that we're familiar with. There they form cysts, which eventually fall off of the fish down to the bottom of the tank. And inside these cysts, they multiply by the hundreds. And after about 24 hours, a new batch called trophites hatch out.
These trophites have just hours to find a fish or they're dead. Once on the fish, they rapidly mature into adults, and the cycle starts new. In 24 hours, one can become hundreds. During the next cycle, hundreds become tens of thousands. Within a few days, tens of thousands can become millions. Because of the sheer numbers and the fact that they really dig in on the fish, ick is a devastating disease, and you can lose everything in a day or two unless you treat the fish.
Almost all the other ciliates can be controlled with one dosage of a broad-spectrum anti-parasite treatment.
However, ick is different. The only time it's vulnerable is the stage when it's not encysted. Therefore, we treat at least 3 times to assure that we get any new trophites that have hatched out. Whether it's encysted ick, which falls to the bottom of the tank, or one of the facultative ciliates, a good cleaning the bottom is one of the best things you can do when you get a problem with any of the ciliated protozoans.
Be extremely careful not to transfer any of the water from an infected tank to a healthy one when doing any of these treatments.
Worms are sometimes parasites of fish on their gills, their skin, in the muscles, and in the gut. These worms belong to different groups, including cestos, nematodes, and trematodes. Capillaria, a type of nematode, is a common one found in the gut. Often the worms are hard to see even with a microscope because of the tissue of the gut obscuring your view, but the eggs are easily spotted. Left untreated, nematodes in the gut can quickly cause problems. Many wormers developed for mammals such as levamisole or mebendazole have been effective in controlling nematodes in fish when added to the feed. Many of the fish in the cichlid family, especially discus and angelfish, are prone to nematode infection. Occasionally, fish also get tapeworms in their guts. Tapeworms are not as serious as nematodes, but will certainly cause your fish to stop growing or responding normally. They can be treated with a medicated food containing praziquantel. The last group of worms we'll discuss are the trematodes. There are 2 major groups here, the first being the monogenes, which we find on the gills and skin. Monogene means that they have one life cycle, with the fish being the primary host. Fortunately, the same treatments we use for the ciliated protozoans will usually get rid of the monogenes as well. They're microscopic, but are quite large when compared to the ciliates or flagellates. Monogenes feed from the water column, but the sites where they're attached to the fish cause a lot of damage. Good sanitation will eliminate a lot of them from the system. The other group of trematodes are the digenes, which we find inside the fish's tissue, including the skin, the gills, and the muscles. These worms have complex life cycles, usually requiring a bird as an intermediate host. Therefore, unless you have fish-eating birds in the picture, they will not infect other fish. In the fish, these digenes are usually encysted and therefore extremely difficult to get rid of. The best treatment is prevention, trying to isolate the fish from contact with the intermediate host. Crustaceans are also sometimes parasites of fish. Argillus, also called fish lice, because it resembles lice, is relatively large, so it's easy to diagnose. You'll find fish lice attached to the gills and the outside of the fish. The other common crustacean parasite is Lernia, or anchorworm. It isn't a worm at all, but just looks like one. You'll find it attached to the skin of the fish, most often on the top, just behind the dorsal fin. Lernia is most often a problem with goldfish. Because of its size, the site where it burrows into the fish is of great concern. Even if you get rid of the Lernia, these sites are very prone to bacterial infections. Crustaceans can be controlled with saltwater dips for freshwater fish and freshwater dips when found on saltwater fish. Both have eggs which fall to the bottom of the tank.
Because they lay eggs, Lernia and Argillus infestations may require several treatments before you totally eliminate the problem. Fungal infections can also be listed as parasites. However, most fungal diseases are secondary to something else and are usually attached to dead tissue or skin on the fish.
Saprolegnia is a large genus of fungus that's often seen on fish and eggs, and which falls into the latter group. Often, if we take care of the original problem, we get rid of the fungus as well.
There are fungal diseases which are primary pathogens of fish. However, they're extremely rare. As mentioned, in most cases, they're secondary to something else, usually a parasite or a bacterial disease. So if you're treating for fungus, treat the primary problem. Also, fortunately, most of the parasite treatments that we're going to talk about will work against fungus as well. We're going to spend a lot of time in the last series of this program talking about chemical treatments. For right now, let's go over some of the things that we can do without using any drugs or chemicals in our water.
First of all, don't introduce fish to others until you're sure they're not carrying parasites with them. Quarantine any new fish in a separate tank for at least a week if possible, and spend extra time making sure that they're behaving correctly. If you want to use a prophylactic treatment during quarantine, perhaps the safest and most effective for external parasites goes back to our bag of salt illustration. By radically changing the salinity, you can cause the parasites to either die or fall off the fish before the fish gets into serious trouble. Dipping freshwater fish into a saltwater bath and saltwater fish into freshwater is a neat trick for receiving any new fish. Within a minute or so, the fish will lay on their sides, at which time you remove them from the dip. Any parasites on the outside will usually have left the fish. Treating for internal parasites without a positive diagnosis is seldom recommended unless you have a long history of repetitive problems with that particular type of fish. One example where this may be warranted is with angelfish and discus, both of which are predisposed to flagellate infections in the gut, especially when you're moving the fish. Just make sure that you perform the whole treatment. Sanitation, good water quality, good nutrition, and managing stress are still your best tools to prevent parasitic diseases. As we've seen, parasites are a natural occurrence in our systems, and as long as the fish is healthy and the number of parasites present is within reason, the fish can defend themselves. With that said, whenever parasites start causing problems, always check for water quality problems first. Often, a good water change may be all that's needed to get the fish's immune system back on track.
We've just covered the major parasites of fish. While you can make some assumptions based upon a fish's behavior, and certain parasites are visible to the naked eye, as we've seen, most of them require a microscope to get proper identification of an infection. This is why we concentrate so heavily on prevention versus chemical treatments. Good water quality, good nutrition, proper sanitation and handling techniques, and quarantining new fish when they come in are still going to be your best tools in treating for parasite diseases. However, it's not a perfect world, and as we've seen, fish do get parasites, and you will need to treat for them. The last program in this series is going to cover the chemical treatments that are available for fish diseases.